we are moving forward because right now our next speaker and the last within this block, who is Mario Garcia. He's actually the GitLab hero at GitLab. Actually, Mario, I'm pretty excited to have you here today because moreover, I'm also excited about GitLab. And when you're as well, they're a hero, I think that you will have a lot of hero stories with us to share about GitLab. Yes, am I correct? How do you do? Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be sharing with the community, the Python community. And well, as you say, I've been a GitLab hero for over a year, and I have some lessons to share today.
We're really excited to listen to them, and definitely I'm sure that more and more lessons and stories to share after even presentation during our Q&A session. So Mario Garcia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, and you may start.
So you can find me on Twitter as MarioJND. And well, I've been a GitLab hero for over a year. And the reason why I joined the program is that I got interested in DevOps. And that's what I want to share with you today. What are the lessons I've learned over the last year, and especially talking about Python and continuous integration and other technologies that I have learned and have some experience with. But before I start talking about continuous integration and some of the tools that I've been using, I want to share when this all started. Well, I learned or I heard about Python back in 2009 when I was attending an open source conference. And well, that year we didn't have tools for managing dependencies or the versions of Python installed on my system for building some Python projects. But well, and the tools that I've been using then were pip and virtual env, but one year later, after I started learning Rust is another language that I have experience with. Something I really was missing in Python was the idea of having a tool for managing dependencies. Rust provided with a tool named Cargo that can help with dependencies and other settings related with the project. And that was something I really was missing to have in Python. But 1 year later, pipenv was presented. If I remember well, pipenv was presented at PyCon. And another tool that I've been using is Poetry. But also the idea of having a tool for managing the versions of Python installed on my system was something that I really appreciate, because before having these kind of tools, one way to install another version of Python, apart from the one that you can have previously installed in your system, you have to download and compile another version if you need a specific version for your project. But with pipenv and Poetry or pipenv, you can manage all of these tasks in a friendly way. And well, the talk is not focused on these tools, but I have to mention them because what I want to share is related with these tools. I've been using Heroku for publishing some web apps, and especially the ones that I've been presenting as demos at some conferences. And something I've learned about Heroku and the support that provides for Python. Well, there's an official buildback for Python talking about dependencies. If you have a repository, you can have a requirements.txt file or a pip file. The official buildback has support for that. And you also have to add two more files to your repository, to the repository of your project, that are a proc file that contains the command that will be executed when Heroku initialize your app, and another one that is runtime.txt that contains the version of Python that will be used on your project, and especially the version of Python that Heroku will be using for running your application. But something that Heroku doesn't have support for is if you need Python with shared libraries enabled, Heroku doesn't have support for that. And when I wanted to deploy a project to Heroku, that when I needed this kind of support, I have to create a Docker image, and well, I will talk about that later. Also, there's another build pack that is developed by the community that has support for poetry. The official Python build pack has support for pip, but also has support for pip file. You can have a pip file in your repository, and Heroku will recognize that file. So the dependencies of your project can be installed. Well, and talking about Docker, there's an official Docker image for Python, but also there are other images for technologies related with Python, like Django, that has official Docker image published on Docker Hub. And if you go to Docker Hub and type Python in the search bar, you will find some custom Docker image. There, probably you will need to create a custom Docker image, especially if you require some additional tools that are not provided but by the official image. And that's something I want to talk about later. Well, when I started using GitLab, I started using GitLab 2 years ago after attending an event that has a similar format to hackathons, but this event was a 2 weeks event. And the team that I joined for building a web app decided to use GitLab. That was the first time that I started using GitLab, and I didn't have any experience with continuous integration, with Docker and other similar tools, and especially with DevOps in general. But that's when it all started. As later, 1 year later after that event, I decided that it was time to start learning about GitLab. And why GitLab? I won't mention any of the advantages listed here, but something that was really important for me was to have a CI/CD tool, but GitLab has GitLab CI that is integrated with the platform. And if you want to download GitLab and configure your own instance of GitLab, you will also have GitLab CI and other tools that are open source, but also are integrated with the platform itself. It has good documentation, and also you can scale the features provided by the platform with the integration that GitLab has with other tools. I will mention some of them, especially the ones that you can use for security. And some of the features that GitLab CI has to offer is that it is multi-platform, it is multi-language, it has support for different programming languages. I've been using GitLab CI with Rust and Python, and it works really well. It has support for Docker, it has support for other platforms like Heroku and Google Cloud Platform, depending on the platform that you chose for deploying your application. It also provides with its own container registry. You can publish from a GitLab repository to Docker Hub, but also you can publish a Docker image in the container registry that GitLab has. But well, let's start talking about what I've learned over the last year using GitLab CI with some technologies like Python and Rust. And wow, if you're building a web app with Flask, I have more experience with Flask, and that's why I mentioned that framework. But the configuration is similar if you're using another framework like Django. But one, you created a repository and you upload the code to that repository. There are some additional files that you have to create for the project, for preparing the project to deploy your app to a cloud platform like Heroku. You have to create a profile that contains the command that Heroku will run to start your application. If you have previous experience with Flask, you already know that it provides a server, but that server is not ready for production, so you have to use another solution like Unicorn, and that's the one I will be using for explaining this example. So the command that you have to add to this file is this one. You have to specify that you are using Unicorn. You have to add this as dependencies, as dependency on the requirements.txt or the py project.toml file if you're using Poetry, or your pip file if you're using pipenv, depending on the tool that you have chosen. Then you have to specify the Python runtime that you will be using for the project. You have to add the file that contains configuration related with the dependencies of the application. Depending on the tool that you're using, you have to add one of these files listed here. But something that that we should take into account is that if you're using pipenv, you don't have to create the runtime.txt file. And also, if you're using Poetry, you don't have to create this file. It will recognize the configuration in the, and it will download the version of Python that you specify. Well, for Poetry, you will have something similar to this. If you're using another library, you have to add that library in the list of dependencies of your project. And something that I recently discovered is that if you are creating a requirements.txt, the wildcards that Poetry that you can use in Poetry are not supported by this file. So you have to specify the version of Python that you will be used. Here I am telling Poetry that I want to use any version of Python that is 3.8 or any latest version. You can export the list of dependencies using this command if you're using Poetry. Heroku has support for this file, and it has support for pyproject.toml or poetry.log, but with a build pack developed by the community. And after you configure your repository, we have to configure Heroku for preparing the project for deployment. You have to create a new app, add a Python build pack. You can use the official one provided by Heroku, or you can use this build pack developed by the community that offers support for Poetry. And something important is that you will need to copy the API key from the configuration of your account on Heroku. We will be using this API for accessing Heroku from GitLab. So GitLab CI can have access to Heroku for deploying the application. Going back to the repository, you have to add the API key that you previously copied from the configuration of your Heroku account. You have to go to settings in your repository, CI/CD, and in the variable sections, add this variable and the value that you have to assign is the API key that you previously copied. After that, you have to create this YAML file that will contain the configuration for GitLab CI. That is the CI/CD tool provided by GitLab. I'm using gitlab.com for explaining all of these settings that you have to do, but if you have your own instance of GitLab, the configuration will be similar. I will show you in a minute one repository that I already created that you can check later if you want to see the configuration in general. So The configuration file for GitLab CI will be similar to this one. I'm just adding a stage for the CI/CD pipelines, just to explain how you can deploy from a GitLab repository to Heroku. But we can have other stages like building, testing, staging, production, or the ones that you require for your project, depending on how you're deploying from the repository to your to the cloud platform that you chose for releasing your app. But well, I'm using the official Docker image of Ruby, and for deploying from GitLab to Heroku, this line is so important. Here, you have to specify the name of the app that you created on Heroku. And this is the variable that contains the value of the API key that is required for getting access to your Heroku account. So it is important to create this variable first. Once this file is created, it will start running the CI/CD pipelines. And that's something I want to share with you now. Let me change my screen.
Hi, Mario, once again. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, can you hear me well, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.